I can't see you. I've got you in my gallery view. Rick, wave your hand. And then here, I'm going to unmute you, Rick. So, Rick, give us a shout out, bro.
Hello?
Hey, bro, we hear you,
on?
we see you. You're beautiful, you're lovely. So I want Rick. Rick is a friend from years going back when my days with Campus Crusade, now known as Crew. You're still Philly-based. The reason I've invited Rick is Rick's like one of the most creative geniuses I know, who applies that creativity into a ministry context. And I know he's written books, he speaks a lot. He was the creator of the most interesting character ever invented in the world of the history of Campus Crusade for Christ, called the Oracle. I don't have time to go into that. But Rick was the creator of that character. So I just wanted, Rick, you to freeform. Like, you know, we've got like 20 people in this class from around the world doing ministry, and we're trying to help them integrate story into their context. So just tell us, how and when do you use story? How do you choose story? Why do you use story? When do you use story? And you've got like 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Go.
I'm ready, man. You know, some years back, they did this study at the Yale Cognition Lab, and they showed people little film clips of geographic, mathematical shapes, little squares, okay? And then they made the square to the right move, and then the square to the left move, and then they move the square again, they move the square again, and then they move the square again. And they asked people to describe what they saw. And, you know, these are just, they're just squares. And afterwards, just by making the squares move, people began to create stories about this thing, like square A was having a romance with square B, or square B was running away from square A. And it kind of brought out the narrative framework or structure that's kind of always in our mind. We can't not see the world that way. And so I tend to think about story and narrative as a structure in integrating it in all kinds of things, not just story as story. So right now I'm actually doing several things in ministry. I'm finishing up a dissertation in philosophy. And so when I look at philosophy, I look at it from a narrative structure. So if I'm reading philosophy, and this would be true of reading anything, or even writing a sermon. These are kind of 5 things that I think about. First, I say, I look for the story. What is the story you're trying to sell? Somehow, as this person is speaking or selling me something, they are presenting the world as it is to them and how they think it ought to be. And that's what I'm listening for. Second, what is the context you've given to your story? Last night, I read the Communist Manifesto. It's just a story. I mean, it's just a really good story, but it has characters, and it paints history in terms of this whole, class struggle. You're like, you just told a really good story. You told it well, and I see why, millions of people are dead now because of your story. Or whatever the implications. Usually people had tremendous implications to their philosophies, but they're good storytellers. They tell good stories. Third, how does your story posit itself as a story above all stories that explains other stories? So for instance, like if you look at Colossians is, Paul is dealing with all kinds of different religions and worldviews. Notice the amount of time he uses the word pan, all, in that first chapter. Basically, he's going to state Jesus is actually the meta story. He's going to say, the gospel which has come to you as indeed in the whole world, it is bearing fruit and increasing. The mystery hidden for ages and generations, revealed to his saints. He's going to basically say this is a meta story. Everything else just fits underneath it. This is the real story. Your stories are only a part of it. Fourth, how are you trying to answer my story questions with your story? Ultimately, when you're telling me a story, you are assuming I have certain questions that have come out of my story, and you are telling your story in some way to answer that. And then fifth, what are the stories within the stories? What are the major metaphors? Metaphors are powerful, and people who use them well do well by them, because there is a whole story with a word picture. Like when a professional golfer is taking a golf swing, and he says to himself, swing smooth. Smooth to him means about 40 different things he needs to incorporate. That idea encapsulates all of these different, ancillary thoughts and ideas. And so look for the words, look for the word pictures, look for the metaphors. So that's how I look at philosophy. That's how I look at a sermon. Theology, integrating narrative and theology, real quick. I feel like in doing theology, the way in which a narrative framework affects my thoughts is I think about anthropology. I think that most theology lacks anthropology. If you read, and I would suggest read James K.A. Smith. He's basically a kind of modern day Augustine. And Augustine, here's what you're going to get out of it. Here's a person doing theology, but they're going to speak about desire. What does your heart want and why does it want it? They're going to speak about telos, that everything you do, if you just move your hand, there's a reason for it. You can't, everything you do has a reason. What is the telos of your life? What drives you? Desire, telos. What do you love? What are the habits of your life? These are robust anthropological questions. Augustine, more than anyone, dealt with them, and a lot of it gets lost today. And there are very few people, I think, when they deal with theology, other than the fact that we're, sinful or broken and so on. We really don't talk so much about these heart issues and what really drives us as people. So that's how a narrative framework affects the way in which I think and write about theology. And let's see, last real quick, how do you decide which stories to use? Something that's true, I was sitting in a locker room real quick last night at the YMCA, and there's two 6-year-olds. Fantastic conversation. One says to the other, "Why don't you skedaddle?" And I just thought, that's fabulous. And the other says, "Why don't you skedaddle?" And the other says, "You skedaddle out of here." And the other says, "You skedaddle out of the universe." And the other says, "You skedaddle to your mom." And here it goes, "You skedaddle out of your underwear." And the next one, "You skedaddle out of your butt." Okay, so I will never forget that story because it's just true. It's true of the universe. It's the gospel. It's just it's just right. It's just the trueness of it just attaches it just to itself as this property of this is how 6-year-olds are. This is how human beings are. And so something that's true just sticks out to me. So I look for stories that just are true. They just, strike me that way. And then, all right, so that's it.
All right, bro. Hey, really quick, what was your second point? Somebody didn't get your second point.
The second point up top was I was just trying to express how I integrate narrative at first, how I view philosophy, and then the second part of that was how I think about integrating a narrative look at theology, which is to kind of think about a robust anthropology.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, in terms of desire, telos, and then.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So, dude, I love you, Rick, man. We have to hang out more. Like, you got to come out to California. I love being around geniuses. I think Jeremy's a genius, and now that's why I brought my friend Rick in, who's a genius. Can you tell Rick's getting a PhD in something? like you got, I love your long syllables, man. Anyway, that was great. Jeremy, respond. I'm just curious. Jeremy, do you have any thoughts or quick comments for Rick?
I wouldn't even dare follow that 6-year-old story about skedaddling.
We went from theology and anthropology to skedaddle out of here. All right.
I thought it was absolutely wonderful. It was really, really some great things.
Yeah, no, somebody's asking the same question. J.K.A. Smith, never heard of that person. Who is that? In 20 seconds, Rick.
Real quick, I just kind of came upon him, but he's kind of he has that Augustinian sort of like, this is how I function, this is life. But he's theologically very sharp, very smart, but he gets how people operate. He gets that we're addicted to things. He gets just all of those things that are human nature. And you think this is theology done well with you get people. And you, wow. I like that.
Imagining the Kingdom is a fabulous book. I read.
Yeah, it is. Right? Yeah.
Is it a Philly thing? You guys are both from Philly. Is he like a Philly local guy? Like I'm missing the
I don't
point.
even know where he is. Do you know, Ernie?
Anyway, okay, so here's what we're going to do. That was great, Jeremy. Awesome, Rick, thank you. Q&A will officially end in 3 minutes, and then if anybody wants to stay, we can have our little bonus round. Thoughts, comments, questions, and maybe, okay, Dave Rankin, go ahead, Dave. Just shout out.
Let me unmute. So, Jeremy, can you tell me the difference? I'm sure this would be a longer story, but the difference between creating a flaw so the guy's relatable to, but also Donald Miller talks about this in his Million Miles book about there's a Rocky movie, and they spend 30 minutes in the Rocky movie at the beginning that has nothing to do with boxing, but he goes and he gets a puppy with the woman's son, the single mom's son. He does all this stuff, and obviously that's to make him likable. So can you talk to is that an and also is it an either or?
Absolutely. I think it's not an either or. I think it's a both and. I think that, anytime, especially the shorter your films get to, the more important this is really great storytelling you're telling multiple stories all at the same time. So anytime I read a script and I see a scene in there and it's just a scene of a character just doing something nice, a lot of times I'll point that scene out to the writer and I'll be like, why is this scene in here? It doesn't seem to make sense. They're like, well, that's just character development. That's all it is. And I'm like, well, you spent a lot of time, pages and pages, on just developing this character, and you didn't progress the narrative at all. And so the thing that you want to be careful in doing and putting those little moments in a story, making characters relatable, is you don't do that at the expense of arresting the development of the narrative. So the narrative needs to be continuing throughout. So when you have that moment of, hey, let's just show Rocky getting a puppy, I would be curious to go back and really watch. I haven't seen the film in a long time, but yes, we are establishing some likability about this character, but how also is the narrative progressing forward? Every scene should either be proactively moving a character towards their objective or proactively pushing them away. You never want a scene where a character is just neutral when it comes to achieving their objectives. So I would bet that even in those scenes where we're developing the character of Rocky, the narrative is probably progressing forward as well. And as we're going to see next week, when we start looking into, a little bit of what we call 3-act structure, there is a part of the film where things do tend to seem to be going well for the main character. And then there's a part of the film or the story where things aren't going so well. So just by your description of those moments, I have a feeling that those moments of spending time with Adrian and going and getting the puppy, I can already tell you what part of the story that probably falls into. So yeah, it's not an either or, it's a both and. Always ask yourself, is this scene moving my character towards the theme of the film or towards their objective, or is there a force proactively pushing them away?
All right, I'm going to officially end this session. Thanks to all. A special thanks to Rick. Man, that was awesome, dude. I think I need to go back and watch that just because wow, that was really good. But I didn't take notes, so I think I need to go and watch it. Anyway, we'll